Life is all about relationships. Lovers, family, body, or money. How satisfied you are can be completely explained by how you relate to things around you. This is Sophie Jaffe, and together with my husband, Dr. Adi Jaffe, we are here to explore and teach you how to maximize your relationships and achieve a happier life. Let's get ignited.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Ignited podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe.
And I'm Sophie Jaffe.
Sophie's back to Jaffe. I like it. We are here today to talk about something that is really dear to me, and that's centering on the topic of addiction. Obviously, we haven't really talked much about addiction in the context of this podcast.
Yeah.
But for any of you who got to us through Sophie and barely know what I do, that's like 90% of my days are occupied with looking at addiction, and addiction in a whole bunch of different ways. The interview we get to today is with Noah Levine, who has a really cool addiction and recovery story. Mm-hmm. And there's so much inspiring stuff to talk about with him, this Buddhist approach. And, you know, it's really funny because Noah looks like a biker, tatted up punk.
Yep.
And he is the exact opposite, which I love.
Yeah.
Because I love when somebody does not at all present the way you think they do. Like you walk into the interaction thinking they're going to be one way, and then they're completely different.
Totally. It's great.
He's like the epitome of it. I think Kaylee has taught with him before. Did you met him before we met him socially?
I met him at Wanderlust. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
He was
does
doing
a lot
of meditation and yeah.
He does a lot of like these really big group meditations because he's so, he's magnetic.
Yeah.
Like there's an element to him. He's one of those people I talk about where we talked about this with Light too. You walk into the room and they start talking, you kind of go like, oh, I feel more relaxed.
Absolutely. I think that's very important when it comes to a meditation teacher.
Yeah, but it's not, I haven't always found it. Some people, I mean, again, whatever, you find what it is that works for you.
Yeah. You connect to him.
But what I love was I wanted to meet Noah because of all the tats and the past addiction history and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then he ended up being a completely different guy, which was really, incredible. really cool. But the conversation with him, it brought up a lot of different things for me because he created this entire movement for recovery that is not AA based, against the stream and Dharma Punks and his treatment center now. And we'll have links for all those things in the show notes, but it's really inspiring to stand with somebody else who is forging a path.
Yeah.
And
I think it'd be really helpful if you share a little bit about how you got to this like moment of not necessarily your story, but just like how you came to this place of non-abstinence based or non-AA modality and like your experience with AA. Sure.
So, you know, it's funny as you even say that the non-AA part and the non-abstinence part, I see as almost separate things because there are people who support non-AA based recovery and are very against non-abstinence kind of stuff. So I sort of tread in these two weird worlds. But so I got sober in AA after the jail and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think we've ever done a full story, but I'm sure we'll do that at some later point.
Well, and also you did the AA modality because that's what, like courts.
That was literally the only thing anyone that was in my camp even said was possible.
Yeah.
I got sent to a rehab. In that rehab, the first moment I walked in, they led me into a group, they stood me in a circle, and until I uttered the words, I'm here because I'm an addict, they wouldn't let me out of the circle. It was like a 45-minute nightmare.
Yeah.
Where they're like, why are you here? And I said, well, I got arrested for meth use. No, that's not why you're here. Well, I'm dealing with a court case. And my lawyer said, no, that's not why you're here. I've been using meth for a lot of years and I'm trying to quit. No, that's not why. I mean, they would just keep walking me through this thing until eventually I said what they wanted me to say. And that is, actually, no, somebody had to feed it to me. They said, you're here because you're an addict.
Oh, God.
And once I said that and I identified as an addict, they were okay with letting me out the circle. So I was in AA for about 3 years. I was sober in AA for 3 years. And towards the latter part of that, I was getting my master's and I was starting to do research on addiction. And I was like, I don't think this message applies to me. But it was really scary because that's all these people are telling you is the only way. And they literally say, you know, if you don't do this, you'll end up either in a hospital, in a mental institution, or dead. It's like, fuck, I don't want to end up in any one of those things. Course. So I'll do whatever they say. So fear-based. So I actually had about a 6-month conversation with my parents before I took my first drink.
Well, and also you never had a drinking problem.
I never had. I mean,
I just think that that's what's interesting is like, you can go into AA for one thing, like having a Coke problem on Saturday nights. And then they tell you you're just an addict in general.
And it applies to everything.
And it applies to everything. Yeah. But not coffee or cigarettes. Not cigarettes. So they're all like disgusting, standing
so messed up.
Side of a meeting.
I've had that conversation with a lot of AA members where I'm like, so what's up with coffee and nicotine? They're like, well, those don't affect you in the same way that drugs do. I go, oh really?
Yes, they do.
Okay, well, why don't you stop then?
Yeah.
So anyway, well, we can get into that in another topic, but I started very gradually letting alcohol back into my life. And then when I kept doing the research, the other thing that was really troubling to me is how many people don't go get help. And so the reason I left doing research was because I realized somebody needed to get out there and actually offer some other solutions. That's how alternatives came to be and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think the beautiful thing is options. There's not one way to eat.
You've been there.
Yeah.
And you've tried to have these conversations with people, you, not me, talking about me, and have been shot down.
Oh, yeah.
People are like, oh my God, that's dangerous and crazy. And your husband is going to like go back to using meth any day.
And your husband's a killer because he's helping people with this other way.
Yeah. Oh, have people told you that directly?
I mean, like the whole drunk driving thing.
What was the whole drunk driving?
Well, like you're helping people to be drunk drivers, basically.
Oh, it's
so insane.
It's insane what people like, how people, so like because I tell people that it's okay to drink, therefore I'm telling you it's okay to drink and drive?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
It's totally, you've drank and drove so many times with me. And it's like.
Well, not even just that. They're saying because you tell people that they might be okay drinking, it's okay to do all this other stuff.
Right.
Here's what that breaks down. And then we'll bring it back to this conversation is, right now, 90% of people who need help for addiction don't go get help.
It's so sad.
And we blame them for it. That's the craziest part about it.
Yeah.
So there are people listening right now who either themselves struggle with drugs, alcohol, porn, food, whatever, or know somebody. Guaranteed, half of you listening right now have this. And you either believe what I'm about to say or you've heard it before and you're kind of confused about it. We say that addicts are liars who are in denial and they don't understand the capacity of their addiction to hurt other people and themselves. And that's why they don't get help. And I call bullshit on all of that.
Yeah.
The reason I call bullshit on it, I've never sat in front of an addict ever in my life where when I said to them, hey, it looks like things aren't really working out the way you wanted them to, tell me what's going on. I've never sat in front of anybody that said, what are you talking about? Life is great.
Right.
Never. They're not in denial. They know exactly what's going on. What they are in is in resistance to the treatment that is being offered. And we keep using that as a sign that what is wrong is their thinking. And I mean, you know this now because I do talks about this all over the country. And I'm actually going to Ohio if we have any listeners there in March. And then I'm going to be doing a talk here locally in LA in April, exactly on this topic. We can't keep blaming the patients because they don't want to take the medicine. That is insane. Like just imagine if in the medical field they did that. They had some pill that cured cancer, but nobody wanted to take it because it, I don't know, made you sick for the rest of your life or made you impotent or whatever the thing was. Mm-hmm. And then we started blaming the patients for not taking the medication. It's insane.
Yeah.
And it's the way that addiction treatment has worked for like 100 years. So I went off and tried to start my own treatment center, et cetera, ran into all the problems that come in there. Noah did the same thing. He actually comes from a Buddhist background. His dad was a really famous Buddhist teacher, and he resisted it his whole life. And so what we connected on was really this idea, just like you said, this isn't about what worked for me. It's really not. All I can offer is what I know and what worked for me and what I researched. But there are a lot of other options there. And the difference for people who are struggling right now, if somebody out there said to them, hey, it looks like drinking is a problem for you. There are like 12 different ways you can address this. There's some pills you can take. There's like 4 different types of treatment approaches you can do. You can go meditate in a mountain. There's like 12 different things you can do, 15, whatever. So many more people would dip their toe in and try to get help.
Right.
And what these crazy people who think that there should only be one way don't understand is they're actually killing people by not offering other solutions.
Yeah, it being the only way, and then it doesn't resonate, and the person thinks that there's something wrong with them, when really it's the method for healing.
I mean, they're told explicitly there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
They are literally told. I mean, I got an email. I shared it on the Instagram story, on my Instagram story yesterday, but I got an email and this guy told me, I've been sober for about a year. I've seen 4 therapists and they all essentially told me, you're a lying addict who's going to be that way for the rest of your life. The best you can hope for is to be a sober addict. And he was like, that was the most demoralizing thing. Like, even if I get well, I'm still going to be suffering forever. And what he liked about the whole kind of approach with me in Ignited Recovery was, oh, you're telling me that I can actually dig in deep and fix some of those things about myself I don't like, so I don't have to struggle with them long term.
Yeah, and have that story for the rest of your life attached to you. You don't have to be an addict for the rest of your life. You don't have to be a recovering addict for the rest of your life. It could just be a thing, like when you were a teenager once. You're not a recovering teenager.
Oh, especially because, I mean, especially if you think about it, how many people quit drinking or using drugs at 17 or 18 or 19? It's like, you're like 45 years old now.
You're such a different human, even hormonally, just who you are as a person. Me at 19, totally, I don't even remember who she was.
Yeah. Well, you know what's funny is you even say, remember when we first were together, you would identify me as like, well, because you have these addictive tendencies. And I think because we've done all this work now, you don't think of me in that way. And that doesn't mean that I don't have personality aspects that make me one way or another. And they're kind of...
Yeah, but it doesn't have to do with addiction.
It has
to do with impulsivity. That's different. You're an impulsive person. You like adventures. You like something being new. Like...
Yeah.
That's different. That has nothing to do with addiction. I know plenty of people that would never struggled with any drug or alcohol or substance or porn or shopping or food or anything, but they're impulsive people.
Well, and that's when people ask me, is there an addictive personality and all that kind of stuff? What I say is, look, the research absolutely supports that there are personality characteristics that go along with addiction. Impulsivity is one of them. Risk-taking is another one, right? Having early life trauma because of all the stuff that brings on. Those are all things that change your personality.
Sure, but that doesn't guarantee that you're going to become one. And it doesn't mean that if you are one, that you have those characteristics.
And not only that, it's like, if you can find a way to live and deal with that aspect of yourself, it'll end up helping far beyond the addiction. So if you don't put your focus on the drug, porn, food, whatever it is, but instead you put your focus on what's right under it, you get much better. And that's, so for Noah's thing and all these against the stream, meditation is a huge component of what they do, because meditation not only gives you that inner peace, but it also is such an amazing tool for building self-awareness.
Yeah.
And if you do that on a regular basis and you build a practice, you get to see yourself.
And also making yourself feel grounded. Like, I think a lot of it is just feeling unhinged. Like, you go to a substance or you go to escape because you feel ungrounded and you feel like things are falling apart. So I may as well just go down this path. And when you meditate, you're quite literally grounded. Your butt is on the ground and you feel the support of the earth. You feel your breath, which allows you to feel centered and focused and at ease.
And it brings you to the moment, right? And takes you away from, or not away, but it can help quiet or kind of allow you to connect to some of those anxieties.
It helps to minimize, like, the more I meditate, the more it helps minimize my reactions. So instead of like grabbing that cookie, like snapping at my child, like whatever it is, that sacred time in between the reaction and the action, I think is just lengthened. And that's key. If you're an addict, if you're not an addict, if you're just a mom who's mad at your kid, like, no matter what, meditating can help you. If you can
take that pause. Absolutely. Yeah. I actually think that brings us right into our relationship tip for this week, because I love this relationship tip. We both read this at the Gottman Institute newsletter and the stuff that they put out, which is really great for people to connect with if you want to. And it talked about 4 main sort of reasons that they found are associated with the vast majority of divorces and the breakups of relationship. And one of the big ones was contempt.
So first of all, I think this is so fascinating. So this therapist, he did a study that basically he would sit with couples, and within one session, less than a session, like within 20 minutes or something, he could look at a couple, and if they had some of these 4 kind of pillars, even just one of them, he could tell you right away if this coupleship was going to survive or not. And so this is one of the 4.
This is one of the 4.
This is the worst one, though. I think
this is the biggest one.
This is the worst one, yeah.
I also have an issue with the thing is like, I think this is changeable. I think a lot of people, when they listen to this, they think it's not changeable based on kind of the language of the study. I think it's totally changeable, and we're going to give a tip on how to change it. But contempt is the word. And I think everybody can understand instinctively, as soon as we say that, if you have contempt for your partner, it sets up a really negative relationship that is going to be hard to enjoy. It's going to be hard to build intimacy. And why? Because one partner, at least, if not both, feel superior. They feel better than, they look down at their partner. And this is not even equality on the kind of like employment thing. It's just like as a human, looking at your partner as an equal. And so contempt is one of the big pieces. Now, we all have things we like and things we don't like about our partner. That's not what this is talking about. This is not my partner has done things.
This is way beyond that.
Yeah, this isn't like my partner did things I don't like. This is my partner is a person I don't like and look down at. Mm-hmm. And so one of the tips for this is sometimes we need to actively build the fondness and the admiration. We can get so wrapped up in the things we don't like, and our brain has a negative bias to it. So like, almost like it's a protective mechanism. Your brain pays attention to bad and dangerous things because, you know, at least from evolutionary sense, that's a survival thing. You need to pay attention to risks much more than rewards because the risks can kill you. So even in coupleship, we tend to kind of end up focusing on the stuff we don't like a lot. And so building a practice, like we just talked about with the meditation, of paying attention to the fondness and admiration you have for your partner is a really, really great thing. And one of the techniques for this I like, and I'd love for you to share one also, is actually writing it. Writing like a little love letter to your partner about the things you like about them. Here are the reasons I love you. And you don't have to write all of them in one letter. I actually would kind of focus on 1 or 2 at a time, but then flesh it out. Write little instances of when that happened. Oh, when, you know, we had that event, when we went to that concert, you did this, or you looked like that, and it reminded me of this and that and the other thing. As you start focusing more on it and you write it out, it actually builds the connections in your brain to pay more attention on the positive.
Adie's going to do that. Adie's going to do this for me as a practice, you guys. And then he's going to put it on my Instagram so that everyone can see it. Just as proof.
Yes, we will.
He's just doing it as an example for you guys.
Not because Sophie wants it.
Not for me. He's just doing it for you.
So that's one really cool practice that I like the idea of.
I think also date night is just huge. Like no matter what, whether you have kids or not, whether you're married or not, just taking time to get excited about going out together. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be dinner and a movie, but just something to look forward to where you get to just appreciate your partner.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to actually build in that like fondness and admiration piece to it, like into date night. So if there's a way to even like one little thing, and here's the important thing in this practice is this is not a balanced practice. So it's not like here are things I like about you and here are things I don't like about you. This is not, you're going to do enough focus on the pieces you don't like. Focus on what is good.
I think also it's about not expecting your partner to return anything. Like it's just
yeah, that's a big one.
I think moving through that and not like giving to get like, oh, well, I made dinner, so you do the dishes. Well, I did this, you do that. Well, I said 3 things that I love about you. What are you going to say about me? Like, it's not about that. It's like you just appreciating and loving on your person, period.
Yeah, I think like most self-improvement tips, you don't do them for what you get back.
No.
You do them because they improve you. So you actually write out the stuff for your partner because it makes you better appreciate and love your partner.
And it makes the relationship stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's our tip for this week. We are going to go into our listener list. I like thanking our listeners. So I want to thank Katie O'Brien, Assad H, Rose 619, Brett C 123. I like when they rhyme. I like that. And I am Scarlett. Thank you so much for leaving reviews. We really love reading them and keep the emails up. You guys have been emailing us at info@ignited.com.
Yeah, we love hearing your feedback. It really means the world to us. It lights up our day.
Absolutely. So, some people are talking about listening to this on their commute and it's making their day and the early morning better. We love listening to whatever it is that you feel like sharing with us. We love
that partners are listening to this together. That makes me so happy.
Totally.
So grab your husband, grab your girlfriend, and listen together. It can be kind of like ritual.
Totally. It's we have a lot of people that are writing to us that they and their partner listen to.
In case you don't know, we have an ignited.me Instagram. So engage with us over there. Come over and give us a like. Come connect with us over on that Instagram. It's at ignited.me.
Yeah, and if you know somebody who's struggling with addiction, I have my Ignited Recovery course, just www.ignitedrecovery.com. There's actually an hour-long web workshop that I gave that's completely free that you can listen to first if that's all you want to do. And then there's a course that you can do if you want to follow up.
Just to see if it feels right, if it resonates. Dip your toes in before you commit.
100%. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Love you. Stay tuned for Noah.
Mwah.
This episode of the Ignited podcast is brought to you by Philosophy Superfoods. The Philosophy offers cleanses and other nutritional products that are unlike any of the other supplements and detoxification programs on the market. Why? Because they actually nourish the body with whole, live, nutrient-rich foods instead of depriving you and leaving you hungry. Have you ever tried a cleanse only to find out that you can't make it through a whole day because you're starving? Ever try a superfood shake that made you nauseous because it was so disgusting you'd rather not eat? The Philosophy fix all that with a simple set of offerings that load up your body with nutrients while actually tasting good. Makes sense, right? Each of the Philosophy superfood and protein blends is vegan, raw, gluten-free, and has absolutely no filler ingredients. With over 15,000 satisfied customers, including some of the world's biggest celebrities like George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Lea Michele, and over 10 years of experience, this is the best stuff you can get. To buy some or find out more info, go to our website, thephilosophy.com.
All right, everybody, welcome to the interview portion of today. I'm here with Mr. Noah Levine. How you doing, Noah?
I'm doing well. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I'm going to start out just I've known of you for a long time. Obviously, we're both in the same industry in general, in the addiction industry. And up until recently, I was running a treatment center, and I've always known of Refuge, and we've worked with some of the same people. But I knew about you before I even started Alternative. So I started a treatment center, and the goal was to give non-traditional treatment that doesn't follow the typical sort of 12-step indoctrination. And before we ever started Alternatives, which was in 2013, I knew of your work with Against the Stream and the Dharma Talks and all that kind of stuff. So if I have to kind of wrap it up, I think in 2 or 3 sentences, the way I always knew of you was as this kind of ex-punk turned Buddhist, bring recovery, meditation, mindfulness, and this new way of life to people who are struggling. That's the way I always kind of perceived you, and that's why it's funny. We started this podcast. My wife normally does the interviews with me, but we started the podcast because we get into really interesting conversations with people, and I was literally like, "Hey, we got to put this up somewhere," And I think this is for me exactly one of those conversations. Not only an opportunity to meet you, but to really kind of get behind the story a little bit and understand how you got here, what your goals are, where you see the world, what your story is. So welcome.
Thank you.
Did I miss anything in the intro and kind of how you see yourself?
Nope.
Okay.
Makes sense. Recovering, punk, Buddhist. Sums it up.
I hit all the major points. I love it. We're gonna post a picture, and we have from Monica. Thank you, Monica. A pic that you sent us. But for those listening, because we're not on video right now, you're fully tatted. And a lot of that was before the recovery thing started?
No. I got sober in 1988. I was 17 years old. And, from a young age, I wanted to get tattooed, but I was busy being a junkie as a teenager. And so I wasn't wasting money on getting tattoos. And also I had some sense, there was certainly like in some of the squats and, on the street, there was people with homemade tattoo machines and a lot of my friends were getting these terrible tattoos.
Yeah.
And I had some sense of like, I'm going to wait until I can get a good, a decent tattoo, even when I was not, strung out.
Yeah.
So I waited and I started getting tattooed after I got sober.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I love that. And this is like a full art expression in terms of the tattoos.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of all of the images are connected to my spiritual practice, kind of Buddhist-based practice, and as reminders of what I know to be true, what I believe.
Very cool. Is there one that I'm looking at right now that has like a really cool story behind it?
Yeah, there's this tattoo right here on my right forearm of a standing Buddha. And in 1995, I was in Thailand, and I was at a monastery, and I was considering ordaining as a monk. And I was sitting in meditation at 4 a.m. in the hall with all of the monks, and it's one of those outside, and kind of there's a roof on it, but no walls, kind of outdoor meditation temple. And the sun's rising, and we're doing the chanting, and we're doing the meditation. And I had this image of a walking Buddha. And, usually you see the standing Buddhas, and sometimes you see one kind of walking in motion, or the sitting Buddhas. And it's had this image of it in my sort of meditation. Basically I was just sort of fantasizing or whatever, and then at that point I was like, I want to get a tattoo of a Buddha standing or walking, rather than, because I already had some sitting Buddha tattoos, and that's the classic image of the Buddha in sitting meditation. But I wanted a standing
I think that's
Buddha.
the one most people are familiar with.
So that's the story behind that one, and of course every tattoo has a story, but let's not waste our time with that.
No, but it's it's funny. I to this day don't understand how I ended up with no tattoos. It's a really bizarre thing. During my using days, I would always plan, but I was busy. I was busy smoking meth, so it wasn't a money thing. It was literally just like couldn't get anything done other than use and sell. And so you really started after recovery, or in the process of recovery. Yeah,
and on all my early, my first 2 or 3 tattoos were straight edge tattoos, and straight edge was is the kind of sect of the punk movement that is drug free. And so I was a punk rocker that was strung out, alcoholic. Yeah. But I knew about the bands like Minor Threat and 7 Seconds that were like the drug free bands. And so when I got sober, I kind of was like, these are my people, of people who are into the counterculture and the punk rock movement, but who are drug free. And so some of my first tattoos were straight edge tattoos.
Interesting.
Which kind of solidified my commitment to being drug free.
Okay, because it gave you a group of people who was still into some of the things you were in before you stopped using drugs, but wouldn't accept drug use.
Absolutely.
What brought you to Buddhism?
Well, partially I was raised into it. My father, Stephen Levine, famous meditation teacher, Buddhist. Stephen wrote books with Ram Dass in the 70s, and was in those in that post-hippie movement, which maybe is the kind of new age movement where they're doing Buddhist practice and studying and practicing Buddhism, but they're also doing Hindu. They have their gurus, and they're also doing Sufi dancing, and they're also doing that kind of American amalgamation, like combining the different traditions. But Buddhist mindfulness meditation was really my father's foundational practice, and he wrote a wonderful book about it called Gradual Awakening. It's one of the early mindfulness books in the 70s. And and I rejected all of that and was an addict and was incarcerated. And my father, at 17 years old, talking to him on the phone from a cell after a suicide attempt was like, mindfulness, dude, try this, it might save your life.
Wow, and that must be some pretty difficult advice to take from your dad when you're literally going against the stream.
I had some attitude at the time of like, how about some real help, like a fucking lawyer or something?
Right, some money on my commissary or something.
You're going to teach me some your hippie meditation stuff. But I was desperate enough, and he was wise enough to wait. Like, he didn't push it on me a lot. But he waited until he sensed the desperation. And he says, like, is it bad enough to try this?
Interesting. And he felt like in that moment it was.
And it was, yeah. And so I started meditating.
In jail?
In jail.
Where were you in jail?
In Santa Cruz, in juvenile hall in Santa Cruz.
Oh, so this is pretty early in the process.
This is 1988. Yeah, this is like, so I get sober and start practicing, at the same time.
Wow.
So that was when I got sober. And, that was the turning point for me. In the beginning, I would say I was doing almost a secular mindfulness. I wasn't really interested in Buddhism, but I was benefiting from the mindfulness.
In terms of the actual practice.
And then a couple of years, the practice, the experience that I was getting, which was, I can learn how to ignore my own mind.
Yeah.
I don't need to quiet it. I don't need to stop it. I need to not pay attention to it, which is important. So many people don't understand that meditation, people have this misconception that meditation is like quieting your mind. And that might happen and does happen sometimes in meditation, but it's not really the point. The point is changing our relationship to it. And so I saw that benefit right from the beginning. And a couple years in, I got more serious and really started studying Buddhism and going on meditation retreats. And by the time I was 19, I'm going on retreats with Jack Kornfield and really committing and really taking refuge in Buddha and Dharma and Sangha as what made sense to me. And part of that was because I was also going to 12 steps. And 12 steps, the people there, the fellowship, like these are my people. The prayer base, the higher power base, the power, some of the philosophy of the 12 steps just didn't make sense to me. It didn't resonate. This Judeo-Christian worldview of people having defects of character and being powerless and only God can restore you to sanity just didn't make sense to me. But meditation made sense to me of like, if I pay attention to my breath instead of my mind, I suffer less. Practical application.
Really pragmatic.
It was very pragmatic for me, yeah.
That's cool. And I mean, how interesting to be finding yourself in this place where you've been running away from something for a while, or at least, trying to push against it. And then, which is not that far from from other Buddhist practices, kind of giving into it a little bit, saying, well, let me actually check this out. And it seems like for you, it hit pretty quickly.
Yeah, it did. And I mean, of course, there's no quick fix or easy turnaround for addiction or for any kind of suffering. So I started meditating and I saw there's some benefits here, and I got some verified faith in the practicality of it. But it took years to really change my, to do the self-forgiveness practice and to develop some kindness and compassion. And it was definitely a gradual awakening process.
Yeah, and you mentioned you put addiction along with other suffering in there. Can you expand on that a little bit? Because I'm a huge believer, we've gotten so used to calling addiction this disease as if it's somehow isolated, right? Like you get the flu, there's no diabetes along with it. You don't have you don't get the flu with some cancer on the side. And addiction, from my personal experience and all the hundreds of people that I've seen over the years, doesn't work in isolation like that. I can pretty assuredly say that I don't know that I've ever seen anybody come in who had a serious drug problem and everything else in their life was actually working really well. They just caught the addiction bug.
Right.
Where do you see that meeting place between suffering and compulsive behavior or addiction, whatever you want to call it?
Well, from a Buddhist perspective, everyone has some suffering. Nobody that's not enlightened, that's not really highly, liberated, is free from suffering. Everyone is. So there's the perspective that actually suffering is normal, is natural, is kind of part of what we're born into, some level of suffering. Now, the cause of suffering is a repetitive craving, right? So the first noble truth is that there's suffering in life. Everybody experiences it. The second is that the cause of our suffering is this craving for pleasure, aversion to pain, clinging to impermanent things. Everyone's doing that, not just addicts.
Sure.
But there is something that
right?
separates the addict from the kind of craving, the intensity of it, the repetitiveness of the craving of the addict. It's a more intense level, and the suffering is more intense than people who are not addicts. So,
what do you think brings that on? Like, where do you see the suffering getting worse?
It's hard to say. The perspective that it's trauma-based makes sense in a lot of cases. I think most addicts with some investigation will be able to identify either some acute traumas or some developmental traumas in their life.
Yeah.
Whether it's a lack of kind of appropriate attachment with their primary caregiver, their parents. Not all, there are some, you do meet some addicts who say, yeah, no, nothing going on in my life, and I just was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I just wasn't. Someone like Gabor Mate, who's convinced that it's always
everywhere.
trauma.
Sure.
He'll say, give me 6 minutes with anybody that says they're an addict and didn't have trauma, and I'll help them identify their trauma.
Sure, and then you get to really expand the definition of trauma, right? Like my parents almost got divorced.
Right.
And I woke up one morning literally to see my dad packed up and getting ready to go. And next day my mom told me my dad left the house. That lasted 3 days.
Yeah.
Right. So it was devastating. And within 3 days he was back home. In my family, as we always did, nobody talked about it after that point. So it was kind of weird. But I would call that a minor trauma.
Yeah.
Right. That's not something I would consider a major trauma. But you're right. Somebody like Gabor would consider that sometimes
But not just
enough.
that event, he might say, well, living in that home with parents whose relationship was conflicted enough that it came to the point of separation, that that was actually the trauma, was living in that environment, not just the breakup and the getting back together.
Which gets us back to your initial saying, which is everybody suffers.
Everybody, yeah.
And so if trauma and suffering are the same, then that's not a huge leap to make.
Right.
You don't have to get to the kind of traumas that most people listening to this probably think of, sexual assault or being physically threatened or living in a war-torn region or getting shot. We think of those sorts of things as
poverty
as trauma. Right. Extreme social stressors, things of that nature. Yeah. Especially something like long over time. I've definitely seen a lot of people with trauma. Opiates, I feel like, are one of those things, especially through prescription opiate use, are one of the ones where sometimes I see people who they might have physical trauma, but they literally just developed a dependence.
Yeah.
And then if anything, one of their major traumas is trying to get off of opiates, which is traumatic by itself for somebody who never imagined themselves getting caught in this web.
Right.
Do you mind?
Yeah, and there does seem to be a difference between an alcoholic who alcohol maybe is an addictive substance, but you really have to abuse it systematically to become physically dependent on it, which is much different than an opiate or cocaine or something like that, where you do it 5 times and your body is like, I need that shit. Your body just becomes dependent on it.
If you're even, slightly averse to the physical struggles that come about from it, you may just miss that point and take it for 10 days or 30 days. And a couple of months into it, really, really hard to kick it. Even if it wasn't suffering, it was just literally pain.
Right.
Again, so my degree was in behavioral neuroscience and psychology. And I do always think of the fact that opiates take care of pain. And as one of the great researchers at UCLA, Naomi Weisberg said, has shown us, is the place where physical pain and emotional pain are perceived in the brain, not all that different. So if opiates take care of physical pain, they also help take care of emotional pain. So also a great experience for somebody who's struggling with trauma and trying to kind of move away from the pain that they've been struggling with for a long time.
I've never been that interested in what causes addiction. And the debate and the kind of, everybody has, these views, and it's a disease and it's a family disease and it's trauma-based, and I'll hear the different arguments. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That seems like a piece of the puzzle. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a piece of the puzzle. But rather than kind of landing in some solid, this is what addiction is, For me, I don't care so much. What I do care about is treating it.
Yeah.
It's about healing. Whatever caused it, it's here, right? And when we can accept and admit and turn towards, oh, I've become an addict. I've become an alcoholic, whether it's substances or behaviors or whatever, that admission, that acknowledgement, that acceptance, then it's like, what am I going to do about it? Not why, but what's the healing path? What's the response?
So you're okay with the label, like you don't have a problem with, regardless of how you define how people got there, this kind of,
it's a disease.
I am an addict, or no, I'm an addict as a definition of who one is.
Well, I've been practicing Buddhism for so long and investigating this, inquiry of who am I? Am I what is my identity? What is the self? Am I, I'm in this male body. Is that my identity? I am a man. And from a kind of Buddhist perspective, it's like, well, that's a relative truth, but ultimately it's not true. It's not the truth. So I actually think about like I am an addict in the same way. On a relative level, yes, I experienced addiction. I'm recovering from the experience of addiction, the experiences that led to the addiction.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite comfortable saying like I'm an addict, or I'm a recovering addict, or I'm a recovered addict, or alcoholic, whatever it is. I don't get too caught up in it, but I also don't have a very solid identity around that's who I am.
Sure.
And that's part of the spiritual awakening process that I'm in, which is
not getting too
tied to any fixed views or identities.
Yeah.
But not also being averse to saying, yes, on the relative level, I'm Noah, you're Adi, I'm an alcoholic, an addict, you're, fine to use those labels, but also understanding that there are limitations without having a solid structure around that's who I am.
Yeah. I mean, if I can be totally transparent, that's one of the things I don't like all that much about the 12-step world is there becomes this place where that is your defining characteristic, you being an addict.
And a lot of our suffering, normal human suffering, being assigned to, that was because I'm an addict.
Yeah.
That was my alcoholic thinking. That was my addict mind, rather than like, no, that's just the human condition of craving for pleasure and aversion to pain and self-centeredness.
And there could be this attachment then in terms of all the negative associations with what being an addict is, right? You talked about character defects and all this sort of stuff, and nobody is perfect. I mean, nobody. And that's something that I was just working with a client today, and that's something that I have to really carefully work on my clients understanding, because they feel like failures. And they are getting signals from the world constantly that they failed. Why do they fail? Because they took alcohol too far. They took opiates too far. They took cocaine too far, and other people don't. And there's this attachment to this label. Here's how we know you took it too far. You're a drug addict, you're an alcoholic. And so that's something that I work quite a bit on with my client, because they do have so much attachment to what that means.
And really, Buddhism comes from such a different angle, which in some ways it's normalizing it. It's saying, of course you were suffering, and it's not your fault. Rather than it's your defects of character and your self-will, Buddhism is saying, no, you were born into a craving system, and you had some experiences that led to more craving, and then you found some relief from that craving through drugs and alcohol. Yeah. And then you became dependent and addicted to that, chasing that pleasure and that relief and trying to self-medicate. And, people that are born into that kind of pain and into that kind of situation, that's what happens to them. It's not your fault. Right. It's not your defects of character. It's not so personal, actually. And I love that Buddhism does that for us, where it just normalizes, it takes the judgment out of it, but it puts the responsibility, saying, not your fault that this happened, totally your responsibility to do something about it.
Yeah, I'm giving a talk literally in a couple of days on that, on transformation, and the concept that we need to move away from this notion that transformation is a magical process that happens in a vacuum. Start giving some more respect to the amount of work you actually have to do. And then expand the idea that we're really all capable of it. You just got to do the work and stop thinking that any struggle you're going through or any specific hurdle in your way is somehow unique to you and is impossible to overcome. So it's been a little road for you. You now own the treatment center we're sitting in right now, and you've been, even before that, you started Against the Stream, right? The idea of providing a social network, not unlike AA and the 12 steps, for people who are looking for this Buddhist-oriented way out of drugs and alcohol.
Well, yes and no. What happened for me was that, so much a part of my recovery, and then my first book, Dharma Punks, which is really a recovery memoir. It's about my experience of being an addict and being suicidal and finding punk rock and what a salvation that was, and drugs and alcohol and what a salvation that was, and then how much suffering I experienced as an addict and incarceration. And then coming to the Dharma, that story that I told you earlier of sitting in juvie and starting to meditate, and how that shifted my life. And how that really became my recovery. Buddhism and the 12 steps really became my recovery. Then when my teachers said, start teaching, after I'd been studying for about 10 years and practicing for about 10 years, Jack Kornfield said, I want you to become a meditation teacher. And this is back in that kind of generation 20 years ago where there was no mindfulness training. Nobody was thinking about meditation teacher as a career path. Right. There was no kind of secular mindfulness. At the most, there was like John Kabat-Zinn was doing mindfulness-based stress reduction.
There were no wanted ads for meditation
no
consultants
wanted ads.
or coaches.
The yoga craze wasn't going, like all of that, 20 years ago when I started getting trained to teach. Yeah. And I was just willing. I was just like, yes, I'm so grateful for this. My teachers want me to do this. I'll do this. And it's back in that lineage where actually you weren't allowed to say, I want to be a meditation teacher. You had to be asked by your teacher to do it. And there was the sort of attitude that if you wanted to be a meditation teacher, then you probably shouldn't be one. There was maybe too much self and ambition in that.
We can talk about what that means for today, but okay. Maybe we'll get there.
That certainly has shifted quite a bit.
Yeah, no doubt.
In the last 20 years.
Just go to Venice or Santa Monica.
So when I started teaching, I did have a conscious choice to make. Was I going to be the addiction recovery Buddhist teacher and then exclude all of the non-addicts from my community? And Dharma Punks, which was a successful book, a lot of people that weren't addicts were like, oh, I appreciate this, and now I've started meditating. All right, I had my own suffering. My suffering didn't manifest as addiction, but manifested.
Yeah.
And then, so as I started teaching, like half of the people that showed up were in recovery and half weren't in recovery. And so when I set up the Dharma Punks movement and Against the Stream, I consciously decided to not make it a recovery-based community, to say this is for anyone and everyone, and that it isn't, and I didn't even call it punks. I called it Against the Stream because I didn't want people that weren't into punk rock to feel like they weren't included in it. So this is for all of us who want to go against greed and against hatred and against ignorance and oppression and the suffering in this world. And then 10 years into having Against the Stream and, this national New York, San Francisco, LA kind of scene happening, I saw that part of what was missing was a specific and intentional Buddhist recovery movement. A lot of people were doing cool things, including myself, on here's a Buddhist way to understand the Christian-based 12 steps.
Yeah.
And at some point I was just like, I don't want to keep explaining reality through, here's a non-theistic perspective on theism. I said, actually, non-theism, psychology, science, Buddhism actually fits perfectly for treating addiction. And so that's when I created Refuge Recovery and put the book out. And, at this point, there's hundreds of Refuge Recovery meetings. And I started the treatment center because I knew that people were going to want to use it in a professional context, like you, starting alternatives. So people are seeking treatment. They need alternatives. They need, there's not a one way to do it. There's many ways to approach it. And so I started the treatment center feeling like it was actually my responsibility to provide a treatment process with people who knew what they were talking about, that were practicing meditation, that were, we were having people meditate, in detox. And you get all of these people who are like, oh no, newcomers, people brand new, they can't meditate. It's like, actually, if you tell them they can and you give them good instructions, they can. The people that are saying that people in early recovery can't meditate are the people in late recovery that don't meditate.
That's funny.
The people who've been sober for 20 years and are like, oh, no, people can't meditate. That's hard. I tried it once.
That's all that shit. I mean, honestly, I hate, that's my thing about these labels, the way we box people. It's like we make these assumptions of what people are capable of and not. And then, and research has shown this over and over and over, we end up projecting those limitations onto them. Inevitably we do. Why? Because they believe us. They see the projected attitudes in us and they eat it up. And I mean, it's been shown from little kids to adults across the gamut. It's just the way you think about somebody else will impact what they have. And so just your attitude of being open and actually expecting a newcomer, somebody in detox, whatever, somebody who's still struggling, how about that?
Yeah.
That they can have exactly the kind of life that they want if they just sit down and kind of get back to trusting themselves, listening to that internal voice, and doing the work. I mean, you always have to do the work.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there are a couple of questions I always like asking everybody just because, listeners are going to want to know. What, if you had to think back on not even this process, but on your life, what would you say is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
It's hard to say. My father said to me when I was younger, he said, find something that you love doing that you would do for free and figure out a way to get paid for it.
Nice. And
as sort of like career advice. He said, find something that you just want to do. Now, it was great advice for me because I wanted to help people.
Yeah.
And I would do it for free. I wanted to be of service, at the time. So, and I would do it for free. And so I've been able to do that in my life and make a living.
Awesome.
Now, I also hear that advice through the musician or the artist lens of all I want to do is make art, or all I want to do is play music. And then, or even teach meditation. There's so many people that want to teach meditation, but to actually make a living at it, not that easy.
Yeah.
To actually become successful, or people who want to play music, but to, the 5% of musicians that actually can earn their living as a musician, we have to also have that understanding that not everybody gets to do what they're passionate about and actually be supported by the world. Or even some of the things that we're passionate about, social work, or, that school teachers that are so poorly supported.
Yeah.
It's these people are heroes. They should be well supported, well
they're
paid.
Literally
and they're
holding the next generation in their hands.
Yeah, exactly. The future. Yeah. And they're underpaid and underappreciated.
Yeah. So maybe take that advice with a grain of salt. As in,
but for me, it was it was a powerful, and it really helped me kind of form where I was going, rather than kind of looking at what makes a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing you say it worked for me, but it's also a little treacherous and doesn't always pan out.
Yeah.
Do you believe there's a real reason why sometimes it doesn't pan out, or is it just luck?
Well, it's good advice. It depends on, the person that you're giving that advice to. It depends on what they're passionate about. Right. I can remember when I was a child, and there was that in elementary school, and they were talking about what do you want to do with your life? And I remember that my ideal was to be a beach bum. I loved the beach so much that I was I just want to be live on the beach.
Yeah.
That's when I grow up, I want to just live on the beach. That was my aspiration.
And here you are in East Hollywood.
But I didn't have a mansion on the beach. I was just I'll be fucking a homeless alcoholic on the beach. That sounds good.
Yeah. All right. I'm kind of happy you took this path instead. But maybe you were testing the other one. I mean, I have this really core belief, actually, that if somebody really wants something, if they tune into what they're actually passionate about, they'll end up getting it. Yeah. It's just sometimes you have to be careful because you may not love figuring out what that thing is. Yeah. And it might be a kind of calling that doesn't lead into the sort of life you imagine for yourself.
Yeah.
I had to come to terms with this a while back when I wasn't financially doing what I wanted. My life wasn't working out financially the way I wanted it to. And I literally had to come to terms going, I don't think I care as much about money as I wish I did. Because if I would have picked completely different options, not the $20 an hour intern clinically, that's a shitty fucking route to money. I would have become an investment banker if I really cared about money. And so sometimes when you get in touch with what you really want, you also have to have some peace with recognizing what that is. Like if you love helping people and social work is your calling and you want to work in low SES status, I feel like there's capital that you get from getting to do what you want.
Absolutely.
Probably not going to get a Bentley though.
Yeah.
And the oceanfront mansion, probably not coming.
Not gonna.
So, so it's like there's a reason to both get in touch and comfortable with what you want, and then also find peace within yourself once you figure that out. And be, I'm assuming you would agree with this. I don't know if that's true. And be open to change. Yeah. What you want might totally change.
Yeah.
Okay, as kind of an adjunct to that question, what has been your proudest moment?
Again, these kind of definitive questions sort of stop my mind a little bit of like the most important or the proudest. Or I've had so many. I experience this level of pride, I think a healthy pride, often when I see my children interacting in a healthy and loving way. And that, that it feels like a simple but a powerfully, watching my 9-year-old daughter and my 5-year-old son being kind to each other. Like that just brings joy and a sense of like feeling proud.
I feel like kids, if I can, I have two boys, and I feel like kids can bring almost pride just from the fact that we get to be in those moments. Because, when I was 24 and in the middle of my craziness, I don't know that I even knew that I wanted it, but I definitely would have never imagined myself waking up next to my 5-year-old, sucking his thumb and just being willing to call that one of the best times I've ever had in my life.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's, on a personal...
I saw your son was just traveling with you.
Yeah. Me and both kids were in New York this weekend.
That must have been awesome.
Went and saw Hamilton, and it was wonderful.
But you took him on a longer trip.
My daughter was in, my 9-year-old went to France and Spain with me about a month ago.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I'm teaching, and I just bring her along.
That's so cool.
It's great, yeah.
Are your kids into meditation?
I'm not interested in pushing it on them.
Sure.
But they see it modeled. It's around them. It's their culture.
Yeah.
It's their environment.
Yeah. So I wish Sophie was here. My wife, she's the one that brings the yoga and meditation to the house. But she's been doing that with them since they were little kids, and it's beautiful to watch them do it.
That's great. So I'll say one more thing about the proudest moment. Each year we have a Refuge Recovery conference, sort of international conference, and people come, some from foreign countries, but mostly from North America, mostly Canadian and American folks. And so this summer in July we had the 3rd annual, and there's 300 meetings now. Wow. And so I have a real sense of like, oh wow, I was able to help create a recovery movement, and that all of these people who didn't feel like they fit so well in the 12 steps, or who had been in the 12 steps for decades and felt like they had outgrown or changed, or that it had shifted for them, and have found a home in Refuge.
Yeah.
And so I have a great sense of accomplishment around being able to provide a format and a structure and a philosophy. Now, of course, I didn't make any of it up. I didn't create Buddhism, but the ability to translate it to an actual addiction treatment process that so many thousands of people are benefiting from, I feel quite happy about that.
Totally. I always say, I don't have a hard time finding a higher power. I don't believe in the Judeo-Christian sort of God per se, but starting a movement like that, the movement itself becomes something bigger than you.
Yeah.
There are many, many things that are higher power than I am. Yeah. That's not a hard thing to figure out. Are there any moments that stand out as especially difficult?
So many.
And again, you can pick from earlier life, or you can pick from this new path.
My earlier life, there was a lot of especially difficult experiences and an ongoing suicidal ideation from about 5 years old until, probably until a bit into recovery. That shifted with the meditation, but suicide to me was an escape wasn't that scary. Kind of non-existence sounded good. And it was a security blanket. It was a transitional object.
Literally, there was comfort in knowing that you had a way out.
Yeah, there's control, power. And it's, on some level, it's sort of the only control we actually have. So I can get out.
I think that's important for people to hear. I didn't struggle with suicidal ideation much. I went through a 6-month period of depression in college, and that was the only time that really came into the picture. But it's such a difficult topic for people to talk about. I was just at a conference, and this woman had written a book about an athlete, a collegiate athlete. The book is What Made Maddie Run, I believe, but she'd killed herself. She was at UPenn, she killed herself, and they talked quite a bit about how do you even discuss suicide without glorifying it, without telling people it's an easier way out, etc. What kept you, from age 5 till at least 17, 18, 19, the security blanket, were there any attempts? Did you ever try to act on it?
There was, yes, there was some physical attempts, but I think it also just manifested as a high-risk behavior lifestyle, kind of
like fuck it,
devil may care if I live or die. And then, it was the drugs and the alcohol it was my addiction that really took the edge off of, I didn't want to exist, so I just stopped existing, and I lost myself into a bottle and a needle and a crack pipe.
Yeah.
And so that, especially difficult experiences. To bring it more current, 2 years ago, my friend Curtis Washington, who was really helping me start Refuge Recovery and was a big personality and in LA recovery, and had worked in treatment for 10 years, and he came over to help me start, and was the admissions and marketing person for Refuge treatment centers. And we were together in this room that we're sitting in, and he left work at 5 o'clock, and I was like, okay, call me, let's hook up later, and died on his motorcycle a few blocks away. And just that heartbreak of that sudden loss of somebody who you're in that deeper, intimate relationship with, and connection, and then just gone. So that was difficult, and it was this difficult year where it was like that happened, and then my marriage ended like 2 months later.
Wow.
And then my father died like 3 months after that. And so there was just this like loss. And having been practicing meditation for 27 years at that point, and focusing on death a lot, and focusing on impermanence and understanding the impermanent nature of all things, made it, less battle with like this shouldn't be happening, more acceptance.
Yeah.
But it didn't make it not difficult. It didn't make it not painful to go through all of those transitions in a few month period. And what I ended up doing was going back to India. I hadn't been to India for 20 years. 20 years before that, I had been to India a couple of times on these like pilgrimages and in my 20s. And I went back and I spent a month in India, and just sort of reflected on who I had become, and my recovery, and my life, and my healing, and everything that had taken place with those intentions that I set in the Ganges and in the Indian Ocean and all of that stuff 2 decades earlier. And so difficult real life advanced recovery practice.
Yeah. The struggles that everybody goes through, and yet finding a way to do it with as much grace as possible.
Yeah.
You kind of just hit on it, but we like asking everybody, what is your self-care routine? You travel a lot, you do a lot of work. How do you center yourself? How do you make sure that you set yourself up to having the best days that you can?
I've been fairly good at making time for fun. I think when I was in teacher training 15 years ago, Jack Kornfield said, what do you do for fun? What's your self-care? He's like, you meditate a lot, you go to a lot of retreats, I was working at San Quentin doing my internship for my master's degree. I was working at a harm reduction clinic. I was, teaching a bunch of meditation groups. He said, what are you doing? I was writing Dharma Punks at the time.
Oh, wow.
He's like, what are you doing for fun? What's your hobby?
You're like, fun?
And I was like, no, I'm just grinding out like service.
Yeah.
And it was at that point where I was like, oh no, I do need to have some entertainment and some not just retreat, but also vacation.
Yep.
And so I've been pretty good at making sure to schedule that in. And this year I went to Costa Rica and did a yoga retreat. Nice. I went to Thailand.
That you did yourself, not that you led.
That I wasn't teaching, that I just went and like surfed in the morning and did yoga. And I went to Thailand, and rather than going into the monastery, what I'd done in the past, I just like hung out and had a holiday and hung out with my teachers and did some practice, but it was like a Dharma vacation rather than like an intensive retreat this year. And in my daily life, I've been more and more exercising, running and doing yoga and surfing and that physical. And I didn't do a lot of that physical, and I had kind of gained weight. And so actually taking care of the physical has been important, because I'm one of the people who I think I focus so much on the emotional and spiritual work that I was neglecting my physical well-being.
Interesting.
And so now in my late 40s, I'm like, actually, I better take care of this physical form that I live in.
At least until it ends, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be with it for a little bit.
And I actually feel quite good, and I'm enjoying kind of getting out and moving my body, and I meditate, and
How much do you mind? I mean, how often do you get to speak to a meditation guru about these sorts of things? What's your meditation practice like?
It's, over the years it has changed. I mean, there was times where I was sitting at least 2 hours a day and doing 2 or 3 silent retreats a year, certainly through my 20s and 30s. Having children shifted it, of like, I don't get to get away quite as much. Once I got divorced, then it was a little bit easier, because now I'm a 50-50, custody. So I have my kids half the time, I don't have them half the time. So when I don't have them, I get more practice in that week, formal practice, than I do the week that I have them. So it's, and I still make sure that I get on retreat and teaching. I teach a lot. Teaching meditation isn't quite the same as doing our own meditation, but there is a quality of a meditative experience that happens even when I'm giving instructions.
I've heard that. I mean, I lead meditations for my clients a little bit here and there, but I don't know that it's become there's definitely a sense of calming when I do it. I'm not as well trained in it quite yet to really be able to sink into it. So self-care, and I love hearing, it's really interesting to hear the answers to that question from different people, because some people, are always going and have a hard time putting self-care in. Other people have these really quick answers of, I do this. They're even almost kind of A-type about their self-care. They're very ritualistic about it.
I probably could be a bit more disciplined about it. Like I feel like I'm pretty, like I said, pretty good at it, but I will often say yes to too many invitations and not schedule in enough downtime.
Yeah. I think that happens happens to most of us. Starting to be able to say no is like a practice by itself, right? Just, wait, let me check before I say yes.
I mean, I started saying like, okay, well, one of the ways that I can slow down is put monetary value on my time. And say like, well, I can't do it unless you're going to pay me something to do it. But then I don't really like doing that because I like doing stuff for free, and I don't want to say no to conversations like this where it's like, oh no, you have to pay me for a podcast. I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. Like, I actually want to have this conversation.
And yet, I mean, I think there's still the ability to put a monetary kind of value on it without always needing to charge the money. Like, just to be able to understand, I'm giving myself the space, but here's what I'm giving up for it. And that's an okay, you start really being able to kind of balance things a little bit more.
Yeah. And for traveling, it's, because I have a lot of, invitations in other places, and that I've kind of said like, oh no, in order to travel, it needs to have this sort of monetary
if it's going to have that much of an impact.
It's going to take me out of town, away from my business and my children and stuff. Then.
This is an offshoot, but not the same sort of questions. This is called the Ignited Podcast. What gets you ignited? What to this day is one of those things where when it's going, nobody has to motivate you. It just fires you up.
I don't have an easy answer to that, because I am not a real excitable person. I'm somewhat of a calm person.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to laugh and I like to joke around, and I want to say that I feel passionate about service and Dharma, but it's not, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's a pretty relaxed commitment to Dharma and to service and to, so, it's an interesting question for me to reflect on what ignites me, because I'm not like, I want to say like not much, but but it's not like I'm depressed. Like I'm not depressed at all. I'm actually quite steady of mind and heart, and have a lot of joy and laughter in my life. But it's not very, and there's this interesting phrase in Buddhism. He says, the Buddha is encouraging, he says, become dispassionate about everything, including the Dharma. Now, I like compassionate better than dispassionate, but what he's pointing to is be careful for, getting to, that the ignited state can be a bit of suffering. High, that ecstatic.
It's associated with fire, right?
Like fire, yeah.
No, honestly, I think that's a perfect answer from somebody who practices Buddhism and mindfulness for a practice. Is I like water better than fire a little bit. Yeah. It's kind of nice. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure.
This has been really, really cool.
Interesting conversation. Happy to hang out.
Yeah, and I'm sure there will be many, many more opportunities to interact. Thanks again. We will put a link to Refuge Recovery, both to the free meetings and to the treatment center when we do this, and I'll let you know when it gets released so you can
maybe also to Against the Stream for people who are 100%. Interested in residential retreats.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Ignited podcast. We were so happy to have you along for this ride. Please go and subscribe to this. Leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And if you want more, don't forget to go to ignited.com, where all the podcast episodes are available with show notes and so many of the little details and links from each one of these interviews. And you can look at all the future events that we have going on, all the things that make Ignited so special, even beyond this recording. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.